Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks, bringing you the latest news from Taiwan. I'm Betty Chen.
I'm Rath Wang. China flexed its muscles yet again with large-scale military drills around Taiwan after President Tsai Ing-wen met with Kevin McCarthy, the U.S. House Speaker. We'll look at how China's hard and sharp power in scaring its neighbors compares with Taiwan's soft power.
Joining us are Chen Ping-kuei, Associate Professor at the Department of Diplomacy at National Chengchi University and CEO of its Executive Master Program in Strategy and International Affairs, and Chen Fang-yu, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Soochow University and former Research Fellow at George Washington University and the Global Taiwan Institute. Good to have you back, Fang-yu, and welcome to the show today.
Based on the 2023 Global Firepower Index, China ranked third behind the US and Russia, while Ukraine got a huge boost from the West, ranking 15. Taiwan, on the other hand, ranked 23, Ping-kuei as one of the three largest superpowers in terms of military force. What is Chinese hard power?
Well, Chinese hard power is based on its military strength. Basically, as you can see from the index, China's firepower, which means its fighting capability, is among the highest in the world. This is due to its high military spending for the past 20, 30 years. China's military expenditure has been over 7% per year. So it always takes around 6 to 7% of its GDP. Compared to it, most of the advanced countries only spend 2 to 3% of GDP on its military. But we have to see the gap between number one and number two. In terms of military spending, the U.S. military spending is huge compared to the top 10 countries. So basically, all the top 9 countries in the world get together and it wouldn't match the U.S. military spending.
So my follow-up question is for Fang-yu. Is China's military strong enough to take over Taiwan at this moment?
Well, it is a complicated question here. So according to the U.S., then we have a 2027 window. That is, Xi Jinping clearly says that Chinese military will be ready before 2027. That is, before that timeline, they will have the capability of maybe to have an armed conflict with Taiwan. However, there are still a lot of different kinds of reasons we have to take into account. For example, maybe there are determinants of using the force and maybe some diplomatic alliance. And we know that the U.S. is now trying to deter China from using force. So there are still a lot of complicated factors here.
Fang-yu, you mentioned China's growing military ambition. I wanted to point this to Ping-kuei. This has brought the U.S. and Japan coming in terms of increasing their budget, all these new drills, and we've seen the Philippines come in. Is this actually backfiring for China?
Well, actually, the U.S.-Philippine drill has been set up before the Chinese drill, so it's nothing new. It's probably unrelated to a recent Chinese drill.
What about in terms of Japan? Japan
sent
their aircraft in this time around.
Right, that's true. That's true. Japan has pledged to increase its military spending fivefold, and this is very unusual. Japan has not built an sophisticated defense industry for many years, but right now it seems that Japan is trying to renovate its defense industry. This is a huge news.
So would you say that China has actually waken up Japan?
I think what China have done so far is shooting its feet. It has been counterproductive for China to raise cross-strait tensions, and it provokes Japan to respond because Japan feels threatened by Chinese move.
But that's actually a good thing for Taiwan.
Well, if you count the risk of Taiwan, the conflict in Taiwan, you may have different answer. Back to the earlier question, if you compare the military power between Taiwan and China, you probably will get an absolute conclusion that Taiwan is too weak to defend. But that will miss out a lot of key components in cross-strait politics. For example, the U.S. assistance, U.S. support, Japan's involvement, and possibility of Australian involvement in Taiwan's conflict. And also, you will miss out the geographic problems for PLA to project its military power. And how PLA can effectively control the island. So we have to understand war is a costly lottery. Nobody knows how war will turn out once the war begins.
Right, at the end of the day, it's deterrence.
Right.
Right, so following back to what you said about 2027, the possible conflict across the Taiwan Strait, how likely is that? What do you think?
Well, nobody knows that question because China is not a democratic country, so it is highly unpredictable for its decision-making process. So, for example, take Russia, for example. Almost everyone, scholars predict that it is too costly for Russia to have this armed conflict with Ukraine. However, Putin still do that.
It still happen, right?
Yeah, still happens. So we have to maybe to look into the black box of the decision-making process in the autocracy to look how much of the different factions play a part in this process. So, for example, in China, why China just so-called provoke so many other neighboring countries? I guess it is because of the rising nationalism. Because in recent years, especially after Xi Jinping took power, he just wages waves of Chinese nationalism to pursue for greatness of the Chinese nation. So under this situation, then the military or the foreign policy has to show its strengths. So it started to develop a bigger army, for example, and to maybe show its muscles into the neighboring countries. So I will not say it's a good or a bad for Taiwan, but it did to wakening up a lot of countries. Because before Xi Jinping, many people think that China is a very important economic market for everyone, and it is better that we do business with China and we make money with them. It is better for everyone, so nobody likes war. However, after Xi Jinping, everything just changed.
It's interesting you mentioned after Xi Jinping, things have changed. Ping-kuei, do you feel that with this change, can countries actually deter China? Because countries have woken up, and if you look at Xi Jinping, everyone has seemed to see him as an enemy here.
Well, we can think about how this 2027 timetable comes out. It actually comes out from two things. One is political. The political timetable for CCP to unify Taiwan, because 2027 will be a memorable year for CCP. And the other thing is that in 2027, that is the time when PLA Navy is capable of invading Taiwan and it is capable of resisting U.S. intervention. But we have to think about, if you announce that you will attack Taiwan at a certain point of time, that will give Taiwan time and ways to defend, right? So I don't think 2027 is a very good argument here, but the military strategists and policymakers tend to embrace it.
So, Ping-kuei, you just mentioned that the military budget from China increased by 7% every year. So my question is for you, Fang-yu. Do you think that beefing up military is the only way to counter China's sharp power, or is there any other way for us to counter that?
Well, I think China has already initiated so-called the hybrid warfare, including on the public opinion, the psychological warfare, and also the law warfare. So I think the war has already begun. So we have to prepare for the Chinese ambition to resist for the Chinese the authoritarian diffusion in a lot of different dimensions. So this is not only the military, but the military is the most direct and the most and the direct dimension that we can see. So I think the self-defense determinants, and also maybe to reform the military is the most direct way to resist or to deter China's ambition. But we also have to pay attention to a lot of different areas.
In terms of Chinese ambition, I'll ask this to Ping-kuei. Despite Chinese scare tactics, though, we've seen drills. It went on for 3 days.
Right.
And Canada still led a delegation to Taiwan, including John McKay, chair of the Parliament's Defense Committee. He said, I'm quoting, "China can't buy respect." What does this mean?
Well, I think it basically means that China can cannot buy respect from all countries. And China is buying respect from some countries, and it was unfortunately quite successful. But China cannot buy support from especially democratic countries such as Canada.
What about smaller democracies? Do you feel that these would be a bit more vulnerable?
It would depend on what the United States do. If the United States can convince the smaller democratic powers to support Taiwan, then Taiwan will gain a lot of friends. But if the United States cannot convince those democracies to give more support to Taiwan, then China is more likely to buy off those supports.
So Fang-yu, in addition to buying our friends, do you think that we're just talking about a hard power and also the sharp power of China? Do you think that these powers from China are failing, not to mention their soft power?
I would not say they are failing big because China is very big, and they have a huge budget for both hard power, sharp power, and also the soft power. That is what we let's define sharp power first. So the sharp power includes some using some democratic institutions like freedom of speech to buy some influence. For example, to buy some support from the media, from the academics, and a lot of different actors. So China do have a lot of budget for that, and there are a lot of research reports illustrating that China is doing this and successful in many countries. So we have to maybe to look at our law system or to enforce some media education or something that we can resist such a expansion. So, yeah.
Ing-wen, you talked about some of China's successes. Can you talk a bit about the recent successes?
You mean sharp power?
Sharp power.
Okay, so the core of the sharp power is manipulation. So a country can manipulate the public opinion of another country. So if China, countries such as China, they have the economic power and military capability to exercise operations in foreign countries. So it basically gives China's intelligence agents and diplomats more tools to infiltrate and manipulate target society.
So this is a so-called wolf warrior diplomacy.
Well, wolf warrior diplomacy is basically first strike with diplomacy. But what sharp power is doing is to infiltrate into the society, try to change what the people think about China. So Australia has been the vivid example of this, and Australia has been raising its guard against China's sharp power.
So indeed, diplomacy is a very important arena for China to exert its sharp power. And as we can see that recently, China just bought Honduras. That's the recent example. So Fang-yu, how concerning is that for Taiwan, especially we're still losing diplomatic allies?
Actually, in terms of the public opinion, there's very little influence on the public opinion. However, that is not to say the diplomatic allies not important for Taiwan. I think still we need the diplomatic allies. For example, they can speak up for Taiwan in the international organizations. If we have the diplomatic allies in the Central and Latin Americans, then we can have the formal trips. For example, this time, Taiwan make a trip to consolidate our diplomatic allies and also make a transit diplomacy in the U.S. So the diplomatic allies is still very important for Taiwan. However, in the past, we are playing a game with China to maintain or to increase the number of the diplomatic allies, and we now abandon such strategy. So we now have a very concrete strategy for consolidate our relationship with all of the countries, not only for our diplomatic allies.
It sounds complicated indeed, Fang-yu. Wanted to go to Ping-kuei. We've seen some people say our successes with Europe as China. Xi Jinping met with Macron, the French president, and there were some controversial comments that came out of that.
Right.
Can you talk a bit about that and how is China succeeding in that front?
Well, criticism has been raised in Taiwan for the past few days, but I follow the international media, and I don't find such harsh criticism against Macron in himself. But it does raise some concerns about what Europe stands in Taiwan-China issue, right? I think what Macron did was that he clarifies what European Union countries were reluctant to say and speak out. So this of course has something to do with Macron's personality and his willingness to pursue some achievement in European politics.
But is this a signal that France will not defend Taiwan in the case of a surprise attack?
We can
from
ask
China?
the same question. If it is not Macron, then will France defend Taiwan anyway? Will any European countries defend Taiwan anyway? So the European countries' support to Taiwan has been very ambiguous. Mm-hmm. It of course supports Taiwan's democracy. It does not want any conflict in Taiwan Strait. However, we haven't seen any European countries contribute to the defense of Taiwan.
What about the UK? The UK seems to be very aligned with the US.
Exactly. UK is quite different, and UK is quite different from other European countries, as you can see. Mm-hmm. UK not only get involved in Taiwan Strait, it also get involved in South China Sea even earlier, right? So UK, following the US footsteps, has been very active in regions outside Europe.
I think it's unrealistic to anticipate that Europe will have some commitment for Taiwan's defense issue. But we can maybe to ask for Europe to have some commitment on the sanctions if there's an armed conflict. So, for example, we have these sanctions are very important because it will give the people the dictators who use the military conflicts to raise their cost. So I think it's not realistic to ask European countries to do some defense commitment. Rather, we can ask them to do the diplomatic isolation and sanctions and maybe to deter the dictators.
Let's hear from Jiho Chang, Keelung City Councilor. He spoke to Rath earlier about China's role and how Taiwan has defined its soft power.
You've been the president's speechwriter, and you've been a political activist from a very young age for Taiwan. Jiho, what is Taiwan's soft power?
In 2016, on the day of the election, I was still working as a speechwriter for the president, for the then chairperson Tsai, who was becoming the president that day. And on that day, very cute young girl named Zhou Ziyu, who is from Taiwan and who is now, who was then and still now, a Korean pop star. And I think she was seen with a flag of the Taiwan flag, national flag, on TV. And she was bullied. She was cyberbullied by all these Chinese netizens. And she had to make an open apology video to the Chinese audience that she didn't mean it, she didn't know better and whatnot. And that sort of incites a huge outcry from the Taiwanese public. The people were outraged that a little girl like her had to suffer all this humiliation from China. And that was the day of the election on 2016. And that made a huge impact on the voter turnout that day. So the president had to come up with something. She had to have a response. And she said that we have to be very rational. We have to be very calm in expressing the Taiwanese identity right now at this moment. So she said that Taiwanese are democratic people, what she defines as the essence of the Taiwanese identity. And I think that's also the essence of the Taiwanese culture. And if you stretch it a little bit, I would say that's also what Taiwan's soft power means. Taiwan's soft power, to me, means that we, the Taiwanese, are free and democratic from the confines of the so-called Confucian culture, the more backward-looking Confucian tradition. Instead, we embrace the liberal side of Confucian culture. We embrace the freedom-loving nature of our ancestors. A lot of Han Taiwanese settlers who came to Taiwan 300, 400 years ago, these people were themselves the marginalized group from southern Fujian province. The ancestors had nothing to lose. So they came to Taiwan for a better future. They came to Taiwan to risk it all. And the result is a thriving future for the Taiwanese. So I think that's sort of the essence of Taiwanese culture. We are freedom-loving people who are still somewhat bound by the better type of East Asian cultural tradition.
How can Taiwan project that soft power that you mentioned in terms of being liberal, the good sides of East Asian culture in the midst of an aggressive China, one that tries to swallow and control Taiwan?
The threat of China invasion or attack has always been like hanging around on top of everyone's head for Taiwanese. Now, for the world, the Cold War was over in '89, in the early '90s. But for Taiwan, the Cold War was never away. It has always been clear and present in our face, because the Chinese missiles are building up every single day, and it's not slowing down. It just keeps building up. And despite all that, the Taiwanese are still living a somewhat chilling life. We're still crying and laughing and better ourselves with finer things in life. We are still trying our best to be the best democracy.
We heard Jiho talk about how culture and identity is linked to soft power. Fang-yu, what exactly is soft power?
Actually, soft power is something that a country uses to attract people, to persuade people doing something, not using the military or economic power to threaten or fear, to make others feel fears. So, for example, if a country has a popular culture or value democracy, the value of democracy, then that becomes a very important source of the soft power. So right now we can see that Taiwan stands in the front line of the authoritarian diffusion. So if you look at the international media, so the coverage about Taiwan is all about how Taiwan resists a potential conflict and how Taiwan resists a potential, especially a conflict from a dictatorship. So I think it's very important for Taiwan to make this as our main source of the soft power, so that we can ask for more friends and to help Taiwan.
So you're saying resisting authoritarianism is Taiwan's soft power?
It's one of the soft power because, so for example, Thailand is very famous for the soft power of cuisines. Mm-hmm. So the Thailand the government promotes the Thailand's cuisine all over the world. And also, let me have an example of for Taiwan. So when President Tsai Ing-wen arrived at the U.S. In the end of March, so there's a coverage by Bloomberg covering that Taiwan has a bubble tea dominating the U.S. market. So it also reports that how Taiwan made the kingdom of the bubble tea, the small bowl of the bubble. So I think that is kind of soft power because that makes Taiwan attractive for people.
So Ping-kuei, in addition to the very delicious bubble tea from Taiwan, what is the unique brand of Taiwan's soft power in your opinion?
Well, soft power can take many different aspects. So the key here is that you do not use coercion. Mm-hmm. You use attractions to attract support, so other countries will fulfill your foreign policy goal. So in that respect, you can think about what Taiwan is good at, right? Taiwan is good at is freedom of speech. It's good at a free, open society. It's good at its democratic process. We have fair and clean election. So these are the advantages that Taiwan can use. So it is because you have these qualities, and then government can use these qualities to sell out its soft power and allow other countries to pursue and create good imaging in international society. So Taiwan not only famous for bubble tea and also but also its democratic society, but also its economic development history. That's another a good strength.
So do you think that we have done enough to promote our soft power, or there's more to be done? How?
Well, it's never enough, right? But I think the Taiwanese government has recognized this very long time ago, and we try to promote soft power very, very, very long time ago. So right now, all the representative office in foreign countries are trying to promote Taiwan's cultural distinguishedness. So that's something that helps to build Taiwan's image and allow other countries, especially the people in other countries, to have good relations with Taiwan and therefore support Taiwan in the future.
Fang-yu, Ping-kuei talked a bit about building Taiwan's image. Do you feel that Taiwan's soft power, and you mentioned earlier bubble tea, will it make it closer to democracies in Asia? As we've seen, going back to bubble tea, the tea alliance where you see, the milk tea alliance where you see Hong Kong and all these countries coming together. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's very important for us to promote so-called public diplomacy. So we have to come up with some ways to have more such kind of stories about our soft power, like cuisine, the bubble tea, the culture, and a lot of many things. So I think maybe we can tell the story about how Taiwan becomes an important economic hometown for the semiconductor industry, and that is part of the soft power as well. So and on the social media and these days, the Milk Tea Alliance is a very good example that because formally, officially, is under the China's pressure, we are isolated in some international parties arenas. However, we can do public diplomacy using our soft power to make more friends on the internet, and also with a lot of citizens all over the world. So that is a very good and very important task for Taiwan.
And I guess you could say it actually started off from China because of repercussions in Hong Kong and Hong Kong students coming together, and you see the same movement in Thailand as well. So these countries share the same struggles. Do you agree to that?
Yeah, sure. So before the 2019 the Hong Kong's movement, there are a lot of interactions of the civil society between Taiwan and Hong Kong and many other Asian countries. So I think it's very important to strengthen these ties, and also I think that includes civil society in China as well. So especially again, before Xi Jinping, there are a lot of interactions between these societies.
But there's still VPN.
But we cannot make it for the meeting in person anymore. So I think we should do something through the internet to make this up. Yeah.
So talking about freedom, democracy, and soft power, Ping-kuei, Taiwan is still the only country in Asia that legalizes same-sex marriage. Right. Do you think that this further set Taiwan and China apart?
I think it is a very significant achievement of Taiwan, and it was highly phrased by many countries, especially the Western democracies. So it does earn us a lot of good friendship. And this will show that the Taiwanese society can accept different values than other countries. And this is pretty precious.
Speaking of different values, on the other side of the strait, if we look to China, Fang-yu, there's still human rights abuses and notorious around the world in terms of how Uyghurs are treated in the Xinjiang region. Do you feel Taiwan shines in this aspect when compared to China?
Well, it depends on how we make this. Make these stories and tell these stories in the context, because we see that China spend a lot of money and resources to tell very good story about themselves. So they try to cover up these stories, and they try to monitor the journalists using the new tools, and also they even try to modify the definition of human rights in the United Nations. So right now, according to the United Nations, China does not violate the human rights, because as long as, according to their definition, as long as the government provides some economic development, then that is what is defined as the human rights. So China is doing a lot of things using the propaganda and we so-called sharp power to make very good stories about themselves. So people do not, maybe not enough people knows that what happened in China. So still, I think it is until recently that we see more and more media starting to cover up what happened in China. But I think it's still not enough for everyone to understand what really happened in China.
But spending time in the U.S., how much of this has penetrated the U.S. public?
Actually, in recent years, I think the phenomenon, I think the trend is becoming in a positive way, because more and more Americans starting to know more about China, and more Americans knows that we have to take it very serious to compete with China right now. But before, I think before 2018 or 2017, still most of the Americans still think that China is a good partner. So it is after the Trump administration which initiated the trade war with China, and then after Xi Jinping consolidates the power and breaks out the term limits, and more people, citizens in the Western democracy, understand that it is a dictatorship, and it is now it is now influencing the so-called freedom in the world.
So Ping-kuei, talking about China's soft power, in the past they used the Confucius Institute as a way to promote their culture or even propaganda or influence the ideology. But for those coming to Taiwan to learn our culture and language, we don't have such kind of facility. Does that also can be one way to showcase our soft power? Or how can we attract more people to Taiwan?
Well, actually, the Confucius Institute is a failed experiment, right? And it shows that the Chinese government will use any means necessary to manipulate the local society if it can. I have heard a lot of leaders of the Confucius Institute complain about that. So, so I know why it is a failed experiment. But for Taiwan, we do have a more free society. We have more liberties on everything. And we can attract students who have concerns about Chinese censorship right now. Well, since the consolidation of Xi Jinping's power, we have witnessed that China has been more and more willing to use state force against its citizens. And this, the human rights violation cases has been accumulating, and it affects ordinary people's life as well. There are more censorship for corporations, schools, universities. So the Chinese society is under CCP's control, and there are many students and scholars who have concern about that, and therefore they would turn their eyes to Taiwan. Now, Taiwan does have a very good system to attract foreign scholars and students. Of course, if we can pump more resources, provide more scholarship, it will make more people understand Taiwan, try to research Taiwan, and more importantly, when they go back, they can teach their fellow nationals what Taiwan is, how is it different from China, especially when in terms of democratic value.
Turning their eyes to Taiwan, indeed. Fang-yu, I wanted to bring out, in terms of the recent news that we saw with Fiji, where it reinstated Taiwan's, or you could call it elevated Taiwan's representative office status, to use the name Republic of China. Is this a win for Taiwan?
Well, I would say that it is part of the diplomatic struggles, and it is still ongoing. So yeah, it is a win on the surface for Taiwan because we can have our name back, right? And it is very rare that we get our name back. Most of the time, it is China that take out the name. So yes, this is maybe one of the very rare a positive example here. But I think we can put it in the context of the U.S. and the China competition in overall for not only Fiji but also for other countries. Like in recently we see the Republic of Micronesia that they are considering to switch the diplomatic recognition again. So I think still struggle in many places. Yeah.
So talking about diplomatic recognition, Ping-kuei, so we understand that Malaita province of Solomon Islands has expressed that it wants to reestablish formal diplomatic ties with Taiwan again. Do you think that it's just because China does not give them enough money, or there's some other factors they would like to establish better ties with Taiwan?
When it comes to Pacific Island countries, we have to recognize that domestic politics always is more important than diplomatic relationships. So the case of Fiji, they changed the name of our representative office because there's a new government installed. So, and then this new government has been very friendly to Taiwan. In the case of Malaita province, we have to understand there are two main islands on Solomon Islands, Guadalcanal and Manata. And in the past, when Taiwan established relations with Solomon Islands, we devoted a lot of constructions on the Manata Islands. So the politician there has been very, very supportive to Taiwan. So that's why when last year the Solomon Islands had the unrest, the president blamed Taiwan for inciting the riot. So if you put in that context, you see that we do have friends in other countries.
But why is it that they support Taiwan?
Because Taiwan used to have a lot of aids, developmental aids, right? And Malata Island has been less developed compared to Guadalcanal. And don't forget, there's also ethnic conflict between the two islands. So when Taiwan came to the Solomon Islands, we actually devoted a lot of efforts to construct and improve the local life in Malata Islands.
Especially the agricultural mission. They play a really
agricultural mission and health center
Yes.
too. We send a lot of health staffs to help them.
And that's, of course, part of soft power.
Right.
Definitely. So we'll talk more about soft power and sharp power in the next section. Let's hear from Chun-yi Lee, Director of the Taiwan Studies Program at the University of Nottingham. She's also an Associate Professor at the School of Politics and International Relations there.
Professor, what is Taiwan soft power?
Taiwan soft power actually is quite comprehensive. So to be honest, it's comprised by different factors of Taiwan's society, Taiwan's culture, and more importantly, the people of Taiwan is a component of Taiwan's soft power. That is coming from what we discussed before about, for instance, the LGBTQ movements, and also Taiwan's civil society, Taiwan's digital democracy, for instance, and more recently, that a lot of the analysis is about Taiwan's production of the semiconductor. But in my perspective, Taiwan's soft power is organic and it's really comprised by the people of Taiwan of all these movements or the factors that I mentioned. It's about the dynamic of Taiwan's society and Taiwanese people. And in my view, that's the beauty of Taiwan's soft power.
Organic indeed. Has Taiwan's soft power helped Taiwan to gain more international recognition?
Yes, Taiwan's soft power, as I just mentioned, because of the people of Taiwan and organic components of the changing factor. So it does gain the international recognition, especially that in recent years, as you would know, that Taiwan's position being more recognized because of the tension of the cross straits. And in that sense, that Taiwan has been noticed or be recognized more in the global society.
Speaking of cross-strait, how does Taiwan's soft power compare to that of China's, where you see aggression or more of the hard side with military intimidation?
Well, this is coming back to what I said of the organic soft power that Taiwan has. And in comparison to the China soft power, which, as you just mentioned, is hostile, military, and aggressive. And more importantly, China's soft power, in my view, is staged or planned by the CCP, the party state, and it will never really sustain in any definition of the soft power because it is just to put on as a show and with a purpose. Whereas compared to Taiwan's soft power, as I mentioned, it's organic and dynamic. So it is the nature of Taiwan rather than to be staged or planned by any party, a political party of Taiwan.
Not being planned, indeed. So is Taiwan winning?
Well, Taiwan is, in a way, being recognized more of the international status. I wouldn't say, as an academic, I wouldn't say Taiwan is winning on the winning side, but Taiwan is on the same page with the like-minded alliance. Whether like-minded alliance recognize human rights, democracy are winning, that is a big question to us all. But I can definitely say that Taiwan is on the same page with like-minded alliance.
Professor Lee just talked about chips. Bill Clinton, the former US president, campaigns famously said, "It's the economy, stupid." Let's look at Taiwan's economic power. The country ranked 16th in global economic development. Taiwan was in the top 10 at number 8 for economic competitiveness. Foreign exchange reserves was at a whopping number 4, not to mention producing more than half of the world's chips. Ping-kuei, how integral is economic power to Taiwan's soft power?
Taiwan is an integral part of globalization, that's for sure. As you can see, even though we have a lot of trade with mainland China, these products eventually are being made to final product and export to all over the world. So Taiwan is a very important partner in the global supply chain. Also, Taiwan has good talents to manage manufacturing industry. We know that the Taiwanese businessmen basically helped China to build its economic empire. So I think this advantage is still there. Taiwan still has a lot of good knowledge, talents, and skills that it can spread to the world. So right now, even if the supply chain is moving from China to other places, the Taiwanese businessmen and Taiwanese high management officers, they still take a very important part of it.
So talking about economic power, Fang-yu, what can Taiwan best leverage its economic might to stand out in the world? What can we do?
Actually, the first thing is to have more economic investment to other countries. For example, recently the East European countries developed very good relationship with Taiwan. But to maintain this relationship or to strengthen up this relationship, I think it's very important that Taiwanese government help more companies to invest in the East European countries to build up our ties there. So that's one. And also, I think as Maurice Strong, the TSMC founder, says that the globalization is dead. So right now it is we call it the geopolitical factor becoming more important than the globalization factor. So I think Taiwan can maybe to emphasize the position in the supply chain. For example, in the global when the U.S. trying to restructure the supply chain, I think Taiwan can emphasize that we are a very trustable partner in this restructure of the supply chain. Yeah.
Is that in terms of copyright infringement, and what areas do you feel that makes Taiwan a reliable partner?
Well, we are good at some areas. For example, we are very good at producing the semiconductor products However, the design part is still remain in the U.S. So we have a very good partnership with various countries. So I think that is our strength. Yeah.
So, Ping-kuei, in addition to semiconductor, which Taiwan is very good at, what other sectors can Taiwan try to work on to further showcase our economic power?
Like I said, I think Taiwan's advantage is in different supply chains. Taiwan actually is the supplier of the supply chain, and it provides very good human capital to a supply chain. So if you think about manufacturing industry, toy industry or shoe industry, Taiwan used to be very good at, right? So we developed many good human capital on this, and these human capital usually go to China because their factory moved to China. And now the whole supply chain is moving. So those talents will move as well, but the base is still in Taiwan. You can see a lot of important industry is still controlled by the home company in Taiwan. So that's something we can work on. And so that's manufacturing industry. And the other thing is that the Taiwanese government had been trying to improve our service industry, especially tourism, right? So this is something that we can keep on developing since the pandemic is basically over. Then we have the opportunity to develop this industry and make it become an important source of Taiwan's soft power.
Fang-yu, you mentioned earlier Taiwan investments. Do you feel that Taiwan needs to focus on certain markets or certain countries with similar values, or do you feel it needs to diversify to expand Taiwan's soft power?
I think Taiwan now still is heavily rely on the China's market. So we still see a very high number of the reliance on the Chinese market. So any kinds of investment to other countries are a diversification of Taiwan's economy. So I think the more the better. So we see we don't have to have limits on which area or which country we should focus on, because there are a lot of opportunities there.
As long as it's out of China.
Yeah, we can say that.
So, Ping-kuei, in a recent conversation between the founder of TSMC, Morris Chang, and also the author of the book Chip War, Chris Miller, they came to Taiwan, and also they said that Taiwan's place in the area of manufacturing semiconductor cannot be replaced. Do you think that's...
If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Feel free to leave us any feedback on the comment section.
Thank you for watching our show today. Stay safe and see you next time.